So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this public lecture. I'm Andrew Spicer, the Director of Research for the Faculty of Arts, Creative Industries and Education. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event on behalf of the University of the West of England. I'm standing in for Alex Gilkison, the faculty's Executive Dean and Pro-Vice Chancellor, who unfortunately had to be in London tonight and therefore unable to be present at an event he was greatly looking forward to. So a very warm welcome from Alex and from I to Andrew Kelly's lecture, Cities and Culture, the Futures of Cultural Planning, delivered as part of his role as a visiting professor attached to the faculty. I'm sure Andrew is a familiar figure to all of us here as the director of the Bristol Festival of Ideas and the Cultural Development Partnership. I'm sure, like me, you've all derived enormous pleasure and intellectual stimulation from the Festival of Ideas that since 2004, after its establishment as part of Bristol's bid to be capital of culture, has become an important part of the city's cultural fabric. Unlike many mission statements, high on rhetoric and low on actual implementation, it seems to me that the festival's aims, quote, to stimulate people's minds and passions with an inspiring programme of discussion and debate throughout the year, have been amply fulfilled. We all have our favourites. One of mine was Robert Skidelsky's How Much is Enough in July 2012, in which he talked about the need to redefine economics as a moral science, which I heartily applaud. And I'm really looking forward to listening to Ray Davies, a boyhood idol, next Wednesday, talking about stardom, celebrity culture, and American influence. It's a series that really has put Bristol on the cultural map, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone present if I record publicly our thanks to Andrew and to others who've worked on that project. Of course, the Festival of Ideas is part of the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, one of the Arts Council's national portfolio cultural organisations that brings together the public, private and voluntary sectors, schools, colleges and universities, community and cultural organisations. Andrew has been director of the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, BCDP, since it was set up in 1993 as a partnership between the Arts Council, Bristol City Council and Business West to promote the long-term development of cultural activity in Bristol and to initiate and lead cultural and heritage projects. Andrew drew on his experiences at the University of Bradford and as director of the Kirklees Media Centre. BCDP has had notable successes, such as the At Bristol Science Centre on Harbourside, brief and animated encounters short film festivals, 8 annual great reading adventures, the Digital Arts Development Agency, and the celebration of the 200th anniversary of Brunel's birth in 2006, which quite an impact on my son in his primary school years. And next year, BCDP will launch Bristol 2014, an extensive programme activity to mark the centenary of the First World War. And Andrew is very well placed to lead this initiative, as he's an expert in various aspects of the First World War and the author of 3 books on the subject. A new edition of The Cinema and the Great War, an excellent book, has been a great use to me as an associate professor in film studies, will be published in early 2014. To return for a second to the celebration of Bristol that this initiative exemplifies, it's a vital aspect of BCDP, I think, that it has an inclusive understanding of culture. In a 2011 interview that I watched on YouTube, that great cultural platform, Andrew talked eloquently about the importance of culture in its broadest sense, embracing science and engineering, as well as traditional arts, and including the emerging digital and green technologies. Andrew also articulated his passionate sense of the power of culture to transform people and places and create a city of ideas that will create a better Bristol in which to live and to work. But Andrew's done more than appear on YouTube. He's co-authored books on Charles Darwin, Bristol aviation, managing partnerships, fundraising and sponsorship, and on the legibility of cities. Which brings us back to the subject of tonight's lecture. As the pre-publicity for the event outlines, the concept of cultural planning, developed over the last 20 years, has looked to the arts and cultural activity to provide not just entertainment, or even the more elevated provision of intellectual stimulation and ideas and debate, but also models and blueprints for better ways of living and working, providing opportunities for cultural diversity and inclusivity, forging the spaces and places through which creativity of various kinds can flourish. Bristol's own 2020 Sustainable City Strategy devotes considerable space to the importance of the creative industries, to the enterprise zone, and to the city growth hub. But of course, in times of economic recession, attitudes harden, opportunities become scarcer, and decisions are made in terms of short-term expediency rather than longer-term solutions. Before I hand over to Andrew to explore these ideas, these issues and challenges in depth, perhaps I could make one more obvious but necessary point. The values he espouses, the debates in which he engages, and the initiatives he champions, and does so much to shape and refine, are central to the UWE's own mission as a progressive cultural institution. Enshrined in UWE's own 2020 document, which you had outside, is a core commitment to create, advance, and apply knowledge, research with impact, that will help Bristol compete as a global city within a worldwide knowledge economy, and which will help foster creativity and innovation. As the Faculty for Arts, Creative Industries and Education, we hope to play a leading role in those developments, and therefore we're delighted to welcome Andrew tonight to learn from his experience and knowledge and his expertise in cultural planning, and to continue the partnership between universities and cultural organisations that his visiting professorship embodies towards realising those shared goals. So my understanding is that Andrew will talk for about 40 minutes, allowing roughly 20 minutes for a Q&A. So I now hand you over to Andrew Kelly for Citizen Culture, the Future of Cultural Planning.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you all for coming today. If there's any problem with sound, just signal, and we'll sort that out. This year is the 20th anniversary of the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, and 20 years provides a good opportunity to look back on what has been achieved and what might take place in the next period of our work. And I want to thank the University of the West of England for appointing me as a visiting professor and for this opportunity. It is a great honour, and it's essential. We've always believed and still believe that higher education and cultural organisations work together. This lecture follows and complements my colleague Claire Reddington's presentation 2 weeks ago, her inaugural visiting professorial lecture. And we'll look at the idea of cultural planning and the Bristol approach with the work that we've been doing, the projects that have worked and those that have not, the key issues that face us now in Bristol, especially in cultural planning, and where we go next. Claire had the advantage of having zombies helping her with her talk. Anyone was there will have seen that, and I don't have any zombies. I did think about raising my failed projects from the dead, but that would have taken all evening. Though raising the dead does feature in a project which we're going to be doing in 2015. The relationship with higher education has always been important in our work. I spent 6 years working for the University of Bradford after graduation, but I came out of higher education as I wanted to work in the arts. I've not exactly hidden this, but a few people know that my undergraduate degree was in peace studies. I'm one of the few people to have a degree in peace studies from the University of Bradford. I actually have 2 degrees in peace studies. I have a master's degree as well. And 30 years ago, I was spending all my time researching the balance of conventional weapons between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. I know those of us around at the time would remember there was this huge fear of the Soviet Union, which no longer exists. The Warsaw Pact didn't exist. And my area of speciality was looking in detail at how powerful those forces were. And it was pretty clear that NATO had them beat when you looked at them in detail. Simply counting soldiers and weapons served to conceal rather than reveal the reality. And that was very important to the work we do in Bristol and have done, because judging by numbers alone is not the right way. And this has led me to question throughout, when we've been asked to do economic impact assessments, as we are indeed now being asked to do again into arts and cultural projects. I'm not sure what contribution we made apart from that. The Warsaw Pact was abolished 4 years after we finished our work. But I remember fondly, most of all, the headline when a report of mine was issued, front page headline in screamingly large type in the Morning Star, the communist newspaper, with the headline, "NATO Lies Exposed," which is the best front page I've ever had. Now, as I said, when I left Bradford, I'd run out of steam on that work, and I was getting much more interested in the arts and cinema, and especially Hollywood cinema and the First World War, which led in a roundabout way to the current work in Bristol. But when I look back at this and what I learned from that Bradford experience, it taught me the importance of academic rigour and research to all of our work, that raising the level of debate is critical, and the importance of vision in taking forward the work that we do. I then did an MBA at the University of Bath, which confirmed all this, and as with all the academic work I've done, took what was best and what was most applicable to the situation in hand. And that comes most of all, though not solely, into the Festival of Ideas, where academic investment at all levels is essential to success. But I want to talk about cultural planning tonight. Few would deny now the importance of culture to a place, to an economy, to quality of life, and to city marketing. But 20 years ago, that was very different. And it's only in the last 15 years that this awareness has become much more widespread, and even then is not implemented well in many places. Bristol was probably, we're not quite sure, the first British city to implement cultural planning through the formation of the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, which brought together Arts Council England, Bristol City Council, and Business West. And I was reminded, seeing my colleague Pat Roberts, who was a board member, then a councillor in Bristol City Council, when the company was set up, the legal advisors came in to advise on the formation of the company, and the legal documents were all written in the masculine, as all legal documents tend to be. And Pat, to her great credit, questioned this. And the lawyers scratched their heads and went away and came back and said, actually, there's absolutely no reason why this has to happen. So we are proud to say that we're the only company in the whole of the UK that is written, its legal documents are written in the feminine gender. So we were striking a blow for feminism very early on. Thank you very much. The company was established following a detailed report by Peter Boyden, who some of you may know, which mapped the sector and identified the opportunities. And Peter has continued his work ever since. And it came out of pioneering work of think tanks, consultancies, entrepreneurial city planners, and urban advocates such as Peter and Colin Mercer, and Leah Ghilardi and Franco Bianchini, and groups like Comedia in London, and academics in Bristol and elsewhere, though it all started actually in Australia. So cultural planning focuses on the city. The future for most people is an urban one. We have to get cities right. Cities used to be shaped by transport, rivers, the availability of raw materials, but manufacturing has declined and services have grown, perhaps at the expense of other sectors of the economy. Certainly the figures lately show that services are way outstretching the recovery in manufacturing. And in this new climate, the traditional elements that determined how a city developed have been replaced in part by culture and the broader creative economy, though Bristol is fortunate to have a very good creative economy, but also to retain advanced engineering and aviation and others. And culture is very important to a city, not only for the feel of the place and the value it provides work. We have a very substantial number of people working in the place, and they provide cities with a unique and competitive edge. And I think that was best summed up in the Grommets project, which took place over the summer, a charitable project working with one of the world's best-known animation companies and one of the most identifiable figures, using the work of artists who decorated, painted each of the grommets, proved to be a huge tourist attraction, a celebration of Bristol, and a phenomenal fundraising effort. Now, towns and cities each have their own distinctive DNA. As the uniqueness of these complex ecosystems has been an essential factor of their success, as has the boldness of certain cities and city leaders. And our work has been inspired very much by the radical and humanistic urbanism of people such as Daniel Burnham and his Chicago Plan of 1909, the great Jane Jacobs, Kevin Lynch and Richard Florida. And I want to talk about some of those people now. The importance of being bold comes out of reading things like the Chicago Plan of 1909. In his great plan for Chicago, Daniel Burnham said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably will not themselves be realized. Make big plans, aim high in hope and work." And certainly if you've ever visited Chicago, and as I had the opportunity to do just a few weeks ago at their own Festival of Ideas, Chicago Ideas Week, you're nothing but impressed with the way that city was built after fires, after crisis, into the marvellous world-class city that it is. And we've always tried to be bold in the work we do, even though some of our projects are quite small. But each one has bold aims in terms of transforming that particular project and having a much bigger aim. But it's Jane Jacobs who really was the prime inspiration for a lot of our work. Jacobs wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She wrote, "Cities are our own artifacts, and the trouble in dealing with them is that planners can only contemplate a city's uses one at a time by categories." She saw the city as a whole, as cultural planning sees it as a whole, with each part of it interacting with each other. And that's how, as I said, we see it too. And in a marvellous passage in her book, she compared life in the city to dance. Under the seeming disorder of the old city, wherever the old city is working successfully, is a marvellous order for maintaining the safety of the streets and the freedom of the city. It is a complex order. Its essence is intricacy of sidewalk use, bringing with it a constant succession of eyes. This order is all composed of movement and change, and although it is life, not art, we may fancifully call it the art form of the city and liken it to the dance. Not to a simple-minded precision dance, with everyone kicking up at the same time, twirling in unison and bowing off en masse, but to an intricate ballet in which the individual dancers and ensemblers all have distinctive parts which miraculously reinforce each other and compose an orderly whole. The ballet of the good city sidewalk never repeats itself from place to place, and any one place is always replete with new improvisations. She wrote this 51 years ago, and it is still the best book on cities ever written, and the book that anyone interested in renewing a city, building a city, making a city work better should read. And someone else who was very influential in our work was Kevin Lynch. He's generally forgotten now, urban planner and thinker. Lynch believed in the city as a work of art fitted to human purpose, a place that could be understood and navigated easily, that started with the views of users, not of city managers, urban planners and construction companies. And Lynch was a huge influence on Bristol Legible City. Many of you will have seen the signage and used the maps that exist in Bristol. And I'm pleased to say that the second phase of Legible City, this time for the digital age, is starting this year through the work of our friends in City ID, who did all the early work and implementation of the programme. But for us, we said then, for cities to appear on the map of the 21st century, they will need to focus on how they communicate, and in particular, how they can trade on their differences. Successful cities will be those that efficiently connect people, movement and places, those that are engaging and empowering, and those that are welcoming, accessible and easily understood. Bristol Legible City aimed to link diverse parts of the city with consistent information, providing a clear identity for the city, the blue signs, indeed later on the blue taxis, and helping promote greater use of public transport. It employed map mapping and public art. It even gave the city its own font. Not only did it make Bristol easy to read, we won the Reba Award for Innovation, and the project has inspired similar work all over the world. And I'm delighted that the next phase is coming back to Bristol. There's one more person I want to mention more recently, is someone called Richard Florida, who's done work around the creative class, an Canadian writer and researcher. And for Florida, he defines the creative class not just as artists, as perhaps some of us, or media workers, or filmmakers, or however we would traditionally define it, but as science, technology, arts, media and culture, traditional knowledge workers and the professions. This is very much the definition that we've adopted over many years. And for Florida, economic growth is built in places that are tolerant, diverse and open to creativity. The 3 T's, as he put it: technology, talent and tolerance. Because these are the places where creative people want to live, experience, be creative, want to cluster with others, something very important to Florida's argument and to us, and thrive. And he argues that what's needed to attract and retain creative people are not sports stadia, malls and entertainment districts. It's street-level culture, coffee shops, restaurants, bars, art galleries, bookshops, theatres for film and live performance, as part of a place that is friendly and has natural and physical beauty. All of these were influential in our work, just as visiting cities and learning from cities have been influential as well. So what does this mean for cultural planning? Well, you start with cultural resources. And for a city like Bristol, anywhere, this could include local traditions, arts, heritage, drinking and eating, festivals, the diversity and quality of the leisure available, the cultures of minorities and communities of interest, the cultural heritage of the place, buildings, landscapes, traditions, language and knowledge, and local products and creative skills in the crafts, manufacturing and service sectors. What's critical here is cultural planning is the strategic, integrated planning and use of these resources. And one of its key tasks is to identify the resources and other such assets and integrate them in all local planning and decision making. I'll be coming back to specific examples in a moment. But I want to say what's important about cultural planning is not that it joins up things and it takes into account the widest range of activity and uses all the assets of a place. In Bristol it could be the City Hall, the Watershed Media Centre, St Paul's, Carnival, the fact that Concord was built here, the Clifton Suspension Bridge, and so on. It's also about being the responsibility of everyone in the city. It's not just an arts, culture department, and not just a local authority, and not just a cultural development partnership, but higher education, particularly important sector now, the private sector, voluntary organisation, cultural bodies and individuals. These all need to be brought into the partnerships we establish, and it needs energetic leadership by cultural entrepreneurs who are good at the three things that Malcolm Gladwell identified as being essential for the spreading of ideas and change in his book, The Tipping Point. They're connectors who know large numbers of people and are good at making introductions in social, cultural, professional and economic circles. They're mavens, information specialists and brokers, hungry for information, people we rely on to connect us with new information. And they sell well, salespeople, charismatic people with powerful negotiation skills who people want to agree with. And that's really what we're about, being those kind of people and that kind of work. We link together projects. We encourage participation, collaboration and flexibility in working with communities and other organisations. Now, this approach is important for the place and for the people who live and work there, but cultural planning is also essential for the marketing of places, which is becoming increasingly important for major urban centres especially. And I want to come back to this at the end. Now, some people don't like this. They see it as somehow sinister. The Marxist academic David Harvey says that cities use culture to become lures for capital. There's too much Starbucks and stadia sometimes. And it's interesting, in his most recent work, Richard Florida has called for government mega projects such as stadia, convention centres and urban casinos to be paused. He also adds arenas. I'm not sure whether I'm going to send the latest book to our mayor. For him, real economic development is people-oriented, organic and community-based. And there is certainly the case that some people prioritise style over substance. They use city branding very poorly. I always find it rather amusing when I go back to see my mother and travel into Staffordshire and I get a sign saying, "Welcome to Staffordshire, the creative county." And there have been other examples of that. They often ignore local innovation and distinctiveness, buying in things rather than using the cultural assets that a place had. And they often follow the fad. 24-hour city was one that came up about 10 years ago. Consultants were pushing this idea that we ought to have bars open all the time and so on. What we try and do is root it in what the city is good at. And Bristol, I think, has managed to avoid many of these problems. But I also want to talk about how we define culture, as it's the stress on the uniqueness of the place which is essential to any programme of cultural planning. Whether this amounts to a form of Bristol exceptionalism is open to debate. There is something about this place which does make it different and special. And I'm taking us back to the Capital of Culture bid, which I led, unbelievably, in 2002, 11 shocking years ago. And the first question we were asked to answer by the European Union is what is culture? Now, this is a really difficult question to answer. It's one of the most complicated words in the English language. And we've always tried to avoid being too restrictive. So what we said was as follows. We start with our overall definition of culture, which comes from our work over the past 10 years with the people of Bristol and reflects their views. We live in a multicultural society in a world of many cultures. For us, culture is what we do and how we do it, as individuals, groups, and collectively. Our culture is the values we hold. It is what we have in common and what sets us apart. It comes from our history and heritage and our hopes and plans for the future. It is the ordinary and the extraordinary, the everyday encounter and the unique experience. It results in art, sport, architecture, science and technology, parks and gardens, hobbies and pastimes. It can be high culture, popular culture, subculture and emerging cultures. It can be commercial activity or subsidised. It can be the dialect we speak, the clothes we wear, the places we visit, the music we listen to, the fun we have, the games we play, our politics and our faith. Culture helps us to find our way through life. It can be a good thing in itself, as well as promoting understanding, regeneration, enrichment and learning, tourism, and the health of people, our cities and society. Participation in an engagement with cultural activity improves and inspires us, providing meaning to our lives. Bristol's culture embodies this. This was the second part of the answer. Bristol is a city with an eventful past, but which is always moving forward. It is a city of paradoxes, parochial and international, conservative and radical, maverick and traditional, old and modern, laid back and ambitious, independent and collaborative, comfortable and restless. Bristol's maritime and engineering achievements, water docks, bridges, ships and planes, the city's topography, green and urban spaces, myths and mysteries, and traditional and modern architecture promote a sense of place. Our diverse population, the influence of outsiders and our city villages make Bristol a thrusting business centre, an intellectual hotbed, a cosmopolitan community, a home for alternative lifestyles, a centre for contemporary music, arts and media, and a model for urban living, playing and learning. Though it has a long history, Bristol is a young city represented by a strong youth culture with a young spirit willing to try the new. I think that stands up pretty well 11 years on in terms of the work we do now. Though we've added new elements, of course, science has become a much bigger part of the culture of Bristol. When we wrote this, I don't even think we were using emails very much, and of course there's been a huge technology innovation program which we're all still trying to get to grips with. And the principle of great art for everyone underpins our projects. And critically, the importance of ideas has become central to our work through the celebration of the ideas that come out of the city in our Bristol Genius theme in the Festival Ideas, to the launch and management of the Bristol Festive Ideas itself, which celebrates 10 years in 2014. When we started in 1993, it was a difficult time for Bristol, with recession, poverty, homelessness and social exclusion dominating the political agenda. Bristol was undoubtedly seen as a problem city by national government. Some people in Bristol certainly described the place to me as the graveyard of ambition, the city where good ideas come to die. And that worried me for a little bit until I was somewhere else and they described their place exactly the same way. And it was certainly not true of Bristol. I mean, how could it be given the history of the place? But the fact that such statements were made showed a lack of confidence. And Bristolian complacency was also referred to often. And it's fair to say that there's been an element of this over the years, though it's now rapidly gone. What was critically changing at this time was the attitude of the private sector through an organisation called the Bristol Initiative, led by John Savage, a man we owe an awful lot to in this city, as we do to his colleague Louis Sherwood, who's sadly no longer with us. One critical issue for the future of our work is to find those future private sector leaders who would invest personally in cultural projects, help manage them, and get their colleagues to invest too. But what was different about this time was the initiative, Bristol Initiative, went to the city, talked about the problems, said, we want to help you, we don't want to take the credit, we want to help you. And a series of partnerships were created, the second of which was the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership. We had a great deal of freedom to operate. We were independent of the partners and could work with whoever would help deliver the goals agreed. For example, we worked much closely with planners, for example, than the council's arts team. One of the paradoxes was that for some members of the arts team, this form of working was not desirable. Planners, on the other hand, saw the opportunities from the start, and they clearly read their Jane Jacobs. Over 20 years, we've worked on many projects. Our early cultural initiatives were bidding for Bath and Bristol to host the Year of Photography and the Electronic Image, which we lost. And Doors Open Day was an early project which celebrated its own significant anniversary this year. We led the development for a time of at Bristol, then a science and wildlife centre, and we did so because the city centre and especially Harbourside were important to us. And we wanted to lead regeneration with a cultural project for the millennium. Originally, planners talked about cultural projects coming after everything else is built. And it's a great source of pride that culture actually led the regeneration of Harbourside. And we're very keen on at Bristol as a project because we've seen science as part of culture. And Bristol already had something strong to build on. Many of you will remember the exploratory that was at Temple Meads, the hands-on science centre, and also Bristol's preeminence in natural history programming. We moved on to the Bristol Harbourside Centre, which was perhaps our most glorious failure, and there's some more to come. We spent considerable time bidding for Bristol to be capital of culture in 2008, which we didn't win, but we were shortlisted and we got very good long-term and positive impact in that it created and funded at least 4 major projects, but most significantly saw, over a period of some years, culture put at the top of the agenda in this city amongst its key partners. We then moved on to running Brunel 200, the celebration of the life and work of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, which itself was a celebration of engineering and science and technology. The Festive Ideas started in 2004, sorry. BAC 100, the celebration of the aviation industry. We ran 8 great Bristol reading adventures. Some of you remember we gave away books on pirates, triffids, immigration, and our most successful project of all when we gave away 85,000 copies of the book telling the story of Bristol in comic book form. If you've not read this, it is still the best introduction to Bristol, and we very much hope we'll bring out a new edition in 2016, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we're now working, as Andrew said, on projects next year on Bristol and the First World War for the centenary of the First World War, and 2016, which I'll come back to. We've also done a lot of work organising conferences on managing partnerships, creating legible cities, fundraising and sponsorship, on whether Bristol should have a mayor and the future of local authorities. And we've been very keen to do this as we have publishing the series of books that we've done, whether that's on Darwin and Brunel, on Bristol Innovation and Bristol Aviation, or the smaller pamphlets on managing partnerships and legibility in cities, because we wanted to encourage debate across the whole city. For this, we wanted to celebrate aspects of Bristol history, but also, frankly, we wanted to sell the Bristol message to others. Now, core principles have underpinned this work, and these are very important for us, and they're important for anybody going through a process of cultural planning. We'd already benefited from the audit that Peter Boyden had done, which showed the huge wealth, even at that time, of cultural activity in Bristol. You'd have to double the size of that audit now, I suspect. What informed our approach was the following. The first is that we've always tried to do just a few things ourselves. I should say that the Cultural Development Partnership is a small organisation. It's never had more than 4 members of staff. When we did our largest project, Brunel 200, which was the whole of the Southwest and was also in some respects a national UK-wide project, we had 4 members of staff. We have 3 now. And we did this deliberately because we wanted just to do a few things ourselves, but critically work through others. And what we do is try and infiltrate other organisations, other initiatives, to work with us, to integrate cultural planning, cultural programmes in their work. And we're currently doing that with the European Green Capital in 2015. And there's a third eye. The first is implement a few things. The second is influence widely. And the third is inspire widely. And we try to inspire everyone to get involved, particularly schools, in work. What we do is strengthen what we have, not create a new bureaucracy. I've already mentioned this. It's not been easy sometimes running large projects on such a small number of staff. But what is critical about this is the money we raise goes into organisations themselves. So we're not really funding a team to do this. We're funding organisations who are helping deliver the projects, and we believe that makes them stronger. We believe very strongly in building on what Bristol is good at. We set up at Bristol because of the city's preeminence in science and natural history. We set up the Encounters Film Festival because the city has excellent filmmakers and animators here. We could have set up a literature festival like every other town and city, but preferred to focus on ideas and an ideas festival as a city of ideas. A fourth belief we have is the wider the network involved, the greater the opportunity for creative ideas. All of our projects seek to bring together the widest range of people and ideas. Brunel 200, for example, had over 90 individual projects. We've got a not dissimilar number for 2014 next year, and we've got over 100 people and organisations so far putting together ideas for 2016. We believe in learning from the past to build a new future. This is a remarkable city. It's the city of Cabot, Brunel and Sir George White in the aviation industry, the home of early work in robotics with Gray Walter and the stunning work that takes place on robotics now. Bristol had the first British Film Institute regional film centre, which then became Watershed, the first media centre, the oldest working theatre and more. So you can see why I was sceptical when people said this is the city where good ideas come to die. We haven't hidden the bad things. We've done projects on slavery. 2007 was a big year for us on that. And in commemorating the centenary of the start of the First World War, not only means looking at bravery, conscientious objection and so on, but it also looks at Bristol's own contribution to that war in the form of its armaments and poison gas industry. We're about the long term. We have an ability to think in the long term and to plan projects in the long term, at least 4 years ahead. And at present, we're finalising details for 2016, and we're looking at 2017 and 2018. And finally, we don't make a distinction between working with commercial and not-for-profit companies. Encounters was a project done with the BBC in Ardman, for example, Watershed and the 2 universities. And all of it's about partnerships. Our work is best, I think, when we bring groups, organisations, interested individuals together with a common purpose. And the First World War project next year is a good example of that, which brings together a disparate but fully committed group of people, from passionate local historians to cultural organisations to armed service groups to academics and others. And all of our projects aim to be like this. I think Bristol is a much better place than it was 20 years ago, and it wasn't a bad place then. If there was ever a Bristol problem of complacency and lack of confidence, it's gone. It's seen more as a place where things are happening, often used as a case study of what is possible. You look at the vibrant Watershed now and First Fridays, they're networking at the start of every month. The stunning Banksy exhibition and the most recent Gromit exhibition. The visitor numbers at M-Shed, which I think took everyone by surprise. The work of St George's, particularly the work we're working with them next year on 2014 and the World Change series about music and the First World War. Spike Island and the renewed Royal West of England Academy. Look at Make Sunday Special. The Festive Ideas now over 120 events a year. And the places that have been transformed, like Queen Square. When we have visitors to Bristol, we always take them on a walk. And the reaction is always positive, and they're always keen to come back. Certainly, the Mayor supports this, and we have a strong advocate and leader in Simon Cook, who's here tonight, who with the Arts Council England has pioneered a new way of supporting and managing arts funding in the city, another way that Bristol can be seen to be ahead of the game. And the leadership shown by politicians, most recently in reducing substantially the size of the council team, meant that the grants programme was protected. The work could go on. Now, next week brings the budget proposals. I can't, frankly, see any increase in arts funding. I think that's going to be difficult. But I think we've made a good case about the contribution of culture to Bristol to build positive things on whatever comes out of that budget process. So we've made great progress in Bristol, but face many problems, some unique to the city, some to individual organisations, some unique to Bristol. And I want to look at a few of these things and say about some of the things we're doing about them. We haven't got the answer to them, but they're all issues that cultural organisations, city planning, cultural planning will need to address at some point. And with the big issues facing Bristol, these range from, for example, there's no doubt that in many respects Bristol is a wealthy place, but we have some extremely poor areas, and we're in a period of growing inequality. This is a core theme that's coming up time and time again in the Festive Ideas. Civic engagement is low. We really must aim to be a city that increases participation in elections, so that next time there's an election for mayor, there's a turnout more than 28%. The staggering imbalance between London and the rest of the country, on all aspects of life, it seems, is brought to focus in the recent report on arts funding, which found central government spending on arts and culture to be in the capital at £69 per resident in 2012-13 and £4.60 per person elsewhere in England. Now, there have been criticisms of this report, but the basic point the authors make is correct. And what's interesting about this is they propose a very good solution, which is to invest in production, not in new buildings, not in new organisations, but actually to give money to make things, to produce new plays, new dance, new films, new events, and so on. A key issue coming up is how we pay for a society that is ageing, but not as a problem, how we encourage the greatest role for us all as we move through life. Some of you may have heard of the graph of doom that struck fear into many local authorities, that the rising costs of social care will overwhelm all of the council services by 2020. That's a problem that needs to be dealt with, obviously. But we don't make enough of all citizens, and we need to find ways of fulfilling their potential and contributing to society in ways, whatever they want to do, at whatever age. And culture can deliver a lot on that. There's also an issue about Bristol and its boundary. This may sound boring and tedious, but there's a real issue about Bristol providing a sub-regional service for the west of England on a city's budget. And it's crazy that in the last round of local government reorganisation, certainly the Bristol and South Gloucestershire border wasn't removed. And this is a big issue for our mayor as well, whoever the mayor is, and I think that there has to be some change on that. I frankly can't see it happening, but that's something which we have to campaign on. There's also a big issue about who's going to come to our events. There's an issue about the hollowing out of the middle class, as the Americans call it, and it's a big issue there. And it's linked to intergenerational conflict, the idea that the baby boomers have stolen the future of young people, and that the younger generation of today may be the first to be less well off than their parents. There's an issue about wanting to be green and still live a modern life. This is going to come up as a core issue as Bristol as European Green Capital in 2015. And we can't avoid debates about consumerism, fracking, the value of nature, and so on. And finally, we all want to leave a legacy. And as part of that, we need to consider the rights of future generations in what we do. So these are core issues which have an impact on cities, on cultural planning, on the whole society. And we have to talk about those, and they have to be part of our work. But there's specific issues about cultural activity which are now clear. Some of us are struggling with digital technology and how we use it. It's expected to be a key part of our work, and we need to do a lot of work on that. A critical issue is funding, of course, and the expectation of government nationally that philanthropy, individual philanthropy, and business support will replace that of support of the state. I have to say I'm not so confident as others are that this is going to happen, particularly outside of the capital cities. We're actually very good at fundraising. We've benefited a lot from the support of many companies over the years, from Rolls-Royce and Airbus, the Institute of Physics Publishing, Business West, and many more. But what we don't have in Bristol, and this is something which we do need to address, is 100 years ago we had individuals like the Wills family, the George White family, who paid for many aspects of the city, the Wills Memorial Building in the university, for example. Now, a lot of those functions have been taken over by the state, rightly, such as hospitals, but we don't have individual business leaders and companies so associated with the city as those big family companies were in the late Victorian period and the early 20th century. And we have to find those, I think. I always hope that one day we'll be able to persuade Steve Lansdowne of Hargreaves Lansdowne that in addition to putting in £13 million a year to pay off the debts at Bristol City Football Club, he might put a little bit into the arts in the city. I'm not that confident of that either, I have to say. But we have to find these people. And three very critical issues for cultural organisations now. The first is the coverage that national media provides. Traditional media is in decline, everyone knows that, and now everyone is a critic. What we need are the gatekeepers and the critics to comment on work. I want to read people like Philip French and Mark Commode and Deborah Ross on film, not just a blogger, though there's some very good bloggers out there. Even locally, the Bristol Evening Post has stopped paying for reviews. So we're losing the coverage that we used to have in the national and local press. I even suggested at one point we hire a critic in residence to help fill the gap, who would review content across the city. A second critical issue is making content pay. A lot of people now want free at a time when costs are high. And how are we going to find a future for our artists, our writers, our musicians? If you read David Byrne, talking heads in The Guardian recently about him pulling his music from Spotify because he was just not making any money at all, and he was offended about the levels of support, particularly that other musicians were getting. We need to get over this argument that people have to pay for good content. And we proudly have always offered a fee for the work we commission, as we recognise that we're paying for a professional service that needs the appropriate remuneration. And finally, the boring return of economic impact studies, which I talked about earlier on. I did hope these had gone away. They certainly had disappeared for a while under the last Labour government, but they've come back stormingly with the Maria Miller in the Culture, Media and Sport department. And we're all dusting off our old reports about how we create jobs and so on. But it just doesn't tell the story that cultural activity delivers. There are huge opportunities, though. And one of the great things about cultural planners and the cultural sector is we are optimists. I just want to take you through the next 3 years that we're working on. We've already mentioned the First World War, the commemoration of the First World War. Our citywide programme will be the largest in the United Kingdom and will be launched next March. And we already significantly have both the University of West of England and the University of Bristol as partners. The Festive Ideas, which will be 10 years old in 2014, will address issues of war and peace. But it's also working with our partners in The Observer and others on a programme of debates on the 10 great issues of our time. We're going to launch a new annual Bristol Genius Day when we celebrate creative people in the city, and a new annual publication, the Bristol Review of Ideas. And we're also working on a conference on playable and legible cities with the Pervasive Media Centre studio in Watershed. A second one is European Green Capital in 2015. There's a critical role for cultural activity here, not only to publicise some of the work taking place, but to challenge Bristol and its people about what can be achieved and what needs to be done. I think we really need a hard look at issues of consumerism, our role in the destruction of species, issues of fracking. Alongside some of these issues, could we not use artists to help reanimate democracy and challenge us all about what we do? I hope too that Bristol will work with Arts Council England on making sustainability a key part of all its funded organisations, and far more extensively than we've achieved so far. Our Festive Ideas theme in 2015 is the Festival of the Future City. We also plan a project that unites Bristol's preeminence in science, technology and digital media, historically and now, with a project called Frankenstein in Bristol, which takes place 200 years since Mary Shelley lived in Clifton, and one of her biographers speculated that she was so horrified by what she learnt about the impact of the slave trade when she was here that she wanted to create a sympathetic monster, which led to the creation of Frankenstein as a book. That was the project about raising the dead that I talked about. Our other project for 2015 is the Romantic Poets in Bristol, celebration of Bristol in the work of Wordsworth and Coleridge. They're more associated with the Lake District. The Lyrical Ballads was first published here. We can rightly claim to be the founding place of Romanticism. So we want to look at their work, but also invite contemporary poets to reimagine Romanticism, nature and the emotions. And then 2016 is a huge year for the city. It's a year that brings together many anniversaries, from the 800th anniversary of the first mayor of Bristol, the first anniversary of the first elected mayor of Bristol, the 250th anniversary of the Bristol Old Vic Theatre, the 70th anniversary of the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, the 25th anniversary of the start of the World Wide Web, and many more. And we want this to be an international celebration of the city and encourage the promotion of Bristol worldwide, but commission a whole programme of work that year in cultural activity. So 3 final areas I want to cover before we open it up to questions. The first is about place marketing and cultural planning. I referred to this earlier. For all the importance of cultural planning to place marketing, we have failed badly at this in this city. It's not been without effort and a lot of debate, most of it wasted. I've sat through many meetings about the essence of Bristol, about whether we should market the west of England, or Bristol and Bath, or Bristol on its own, and what makes Bristol special. What's interesting is one of the first, I've heard this many times, when people say, what's good about Bristol, is often the first thing said, that it's easy to get to the countryside from here. And I think that's a terrible response to what we should be saying. It's a fantastic city that we should be making special. There was even a competition, I remember, that Venue ran for a slogan for Bristol, the winner of which was, "It's better than Stroud." It looks like things are coming together now. Rightly, the approach is Bristol and the brand is Bristol. And once again, the universities are heavily involved in this. The second point is a new partnership with the universities, both in new ways. Both Bristol universities are heavily involved in cultural activity and the city, and that is much welcomed. Some of this is at a very high level, the work of Pervasive Media Studio and Watershed. Other involvements are not so complex. Our annual project with the graphic design students at the University of the West of England for our graphic novels evening, where the students create a poster for the event. But all the time we're using and working with the students and staff there to celebrate and work with the talent that's there. We're talking now about 3 new initiatives: a think tank for the city, a new research centre, and through the Festive Ideas, work with students on getting them more engaged in the festival, particularly in the new Young People's Festival of Ideas that we launched recently. We're keen always to see the knowledge of higher education staff and students contribute to all our projects. We'd like to crowdsource answers from them to long-running problems facing the city. Why can't we ask behavioural scientists to tell us why people give and don't give to arts activities, or why people don't vote, and how we can get more people engaged in civic life? And that's just 2 examples. The third point is the cultural entrepreneur and the city. We've made much progress over a decade in the quality of arts management, UK-wide, huge amounts of training programmes, though perhaps we've not been so good in getting quality development directors for fundraisers. But we need entrepreneurs that have vision for culture in the city, that know about planning, that can take ideas and run with them, that can build partnerships and networks, that are all the things that Malcolm Gladwell identified in The Tipping Point. You can see the new breed of cultural entrepreneurs in some of our arts and cultural organisations, but not in all. We need those with a similar entrepreneurial nature in the City Council. The Council is talking about appointing a new Director of Culture, and I hope that if they do, that the person appointed is as creative, entrepreneurial and collaborative as the sector they seek to serve and work with. And finally, I want to talk about books, which have always been the love of my life alongside cinema, and which meant a lot to my work here. And I want to close with 2 quotes from books which have been very important, and both are about the optimism I talked about earlier. The first is by the Second World War hero Richard Hillary. Hillary was a fighter pilot. After being shot down, he spent months in hospital undergoing pioneering plastic surgery to rebuild his face and hands as part of Archibald Mackindow's Guinea Pig Club. He wrote a brilliant book, The Last Enemy, in 1942, about his life and experiences, and especially the friends he had lost. He died 7 months later in another crash. He was much in despair during this time, not knowing what he could do for his friends, not knowing what he could do for the living, and not knowing what he could do for himself. And at the end, he realised that he did have a role, and it was as a writer. I wanted to seize a gun and fire it, hit somebody, break a window, anything. I saw the months ahead of me, hospital, 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 operation after operation, and I was in despair. Somehow I got myself home, undressed and into bed, and fell into a troubled sleep. But I did not rest. When I awoke, the problem was still within me. Surely there must be something. Then after a while it came to me. I could write. Later there would be other things, but now I could write. I had talked about it long enough. I was to be a writer just like that. I was to be a writer but in a vacuum. Well, here was my chance. To write I needed 2 things, a subject and a public. Now I know well enough my subject. I would write of these men, of Peter, his friend, and of the others. I would write for them and would write with them. They would be at my side. And to whom would I address this book? To whom would I be speaking when I spoke of these men? And that too I knew. To humanity, for humanity must be the public of any book. Yes, that despised humanity, which I had so scorned and ridiculed to Peter. This was earlier in the book. If I could do this thing, could tell a little of the lives of these men, I would have justified, at least in some measure, my right to fellowship with my dead and to the friendship of those with courage and steadfastness who were still living and who would go on fighting until the ideals for which their comrades had died were stamped forever on the future of civilization. In the depths of despair and in the midst of a war that often seemed lost, Richard Hillary became a writer, a great writer, with only 1 book. He had a commitment at last and an optimism that he could make a difference in times of despair. And although we're not in that level of despair as we were in the Second World War, it's an example of how artists could address seriously, for example in 2015, the way a new future needs to be built in a greener world. And that's something we'll be focusing on strongly. And the final quote is from David Landis, the economic historian. In The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, Why Some Are Rich and Some So Poor. He said, in this world, the optimists have it, not because they're always right, but because they are positive. Even when they are wrong, they are positive, and that is the way of achievement, correction, improvement and success. Educated, eye-open optimism pays. That belief has guided our work and has done for 20 years. That however difficult things are, we are optimists. Short-term funding does look difficult, but we are confident in the long term. Bristol has gone from being a problem city to one that others wish to emulate. It's gone from some believing there's the place where good ideas come to die to one where good ideas thrive. It's a good city that could once again become a great city, and culture and partnerships will be at the centre of this. Thank you very much.